Hello and welcome to episode 154 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, Toyota raises the price of the Prius again in Canada to a whopping $10,000 more than what I paid a couple of years ago. Apparently, the money is going to the corporation's retirement plan, not the employee's retirement plan. The company is retiring.
The Vogtle nuclear reactor has come online in Georgia, making it the first new nuclear plant in the U.S. in 3 decades. To celebrate this milestone, our podcast will now double its budget and release all of our episodes 7 years late.
Oh, Biden called on companies to make a better cold weather heat pump, and guess what? They have. They did it in less time than the 2 years it took the McDonald's chef in Canada to perfect the Big Mac, the Chicken Big Mac, which is debuted across the country today, unfortunately.
Interesting.
And that, of course, was a result of a Trump-era research grant.
Air in the UK is getting cleaner as coal use has dropped to its lowest level since 1757. So we're going to party like it's 1756.
Woo! And also on the show this week, we'll assist a listener who's on a road trip from Virginia to Nevada. And Tesla's Investor Day was actually about a sustainable economy. Brian, that means this podcast is essentially one big investor day. Plus, Tesla opens its Supercharger network to non-Teslas, and this is a big moment for the future of sustainable transportation, and I'm surprised by how elegant of a solution they came up with. This and a bunch whack more on this week's edition of the Clean Energy Show.
Yes, definitely lots to talk about this week. I want to start by talking about BlackBerry, which leads us eventually into the discussion.
Have you ever had
Tesla.
a BlackBerry? I skipped BlackBerry.
I never had one, no. Did you?
No, just some Nokia flip phones and things like that.
Yeah, so BlackBerry, of course, was at one time the leader in cell phones, a Canadian company, actually, and their cell phones had a keyboard on them, and people loved their BlackBerries. They called them crackberries. It was really the first kind of...
Obama had one. All the members of Congress were using them. Journalists were using them. They had keyboards on them.
Yeah, and people did like the keyboards, and a lot of people were kind of slow to give up the keyboard. But, of course, in 2007, Steve Jobs presented the iPhone to the world. There was a big presentation, and I was just thinking about it because it related to Toyota and what's going on with EVs these days. So there was a story it was unveiled at a 2007 presentation, and then a few months later, the phone came out and people could actually see it. But there was a news story that came out maybe 10 years ago, kind of in the tech press, about BlackBerry around that time. And the story that they spoke to one of the engineers at BlackBerry, and they watched the Steve Jobs presentation back in 2007, and they thought, okay, well, this phone looks great, but, there's no way it's going to work. There's no way it's going to do all the things that they say it's going to do. Because if that's true, the battery life would be like 2 hours. Like there's no way this is going to work. 2 hour battery life maximum. So, they were very skeptical about this iPhone that was about to come and disrupt their world. So then the iPhone finally comes out, and they bought one at BlackBerry, and they tore it apart and looked inside of it. And they opened it up and realized that 90% of the insides was battery. And that's how it worked. That's how the battery life was actually reasonable, because Apple figured out how to miniaturize everything, and most of the inside of that original phone was mostly battery. But I just think about that because there was a story this week about Toyota. This was reported in a few different places. I read it in Drive Tesla Canada about a teardown. So Toyota, 3 years after it came out, have finally torn down a Tesla Model Y, which is their chief competition now here in the 21st century. So there was a story, I think the original story was in Automotive News, but been picked up a lot, that one of the executives at Toyota, after tearing down the Tesla Model Y, called it a masterpiece, that this was...
Really? How do they know that?
Well, just from sometimes got to tear these things apart to really know what's going on, like what is Tesla actually doing. But, unlike the BlackBerry engineers who tore the iPhone apart immediately when it came out, Toyota waited 3 years to do it. And this is already now the, previous generation, basically, of Tesla.
This is incumbent pride. This is the things that they overtook when they started out. But did they learn the lesson? Did they remember those lessons? No.
Yeah, and Sandy Munro, like he was part of this coverage of the Tesla Investor Day that we're going to talk about. And he said at one time he's been involved in the auto industry for years, and he spoke to the grandfather at one point, the grandfather of the guy who just stepped down as CEO. And, back in those days, they had an expression of always be dissatisfied at Toyota. That was their modus operandi, always be dissatisfied. And that way you're continually making improvements and getting better. But they seem to have perhaps strayed from that plan. So,
or they've kept on it, but they've just looked inwards, like let's just improve what we have and not think outside the box, which is literally what you do when you look at the competition's model.
And they are still the world leaders. They make the most cars. It's not going to be for too much longer.
But they've woken up, haven't they? The sales numbers have alarmed them once a certain threshold was hit. That they've Well, they could have listened to our show. We've been on the air for 3 years. I mean, think of the millions they could have saved, maybe billions. Why isn't that money in my pocket instead of theirs? Well, I completed the financing for the Chevy Bolt EUV that I've got a pre-order. So now I'm officially on the pre-order list now that we've completed the financing phone call, which was a phone call from the financing department. To my surprise, they didn't ask about a trade-in. They approved us without the, $24,000 I might get from a trade-in. So that's impressive. The Toyota like ours that is for sale at the local lot that I'm hoping to get lots of money for, it sold finally. For last price was around 26.5 or something like that. So I'm still hoping to get a good chunk of money for my car when we sell it, and it'll have to do some personal detailing on it because my wife has kids in the car that are actually worse than my kids, which is. My kids were filthy, but these kids will.
That's saying something.
These kids will do terrible, terrible things to cars. There's a police plane flying around now in the city where we live. We have like 250,000 people, and we didn't really need some places have police helicopters flying around all the time. But I live in a nice, quiet city, and I live near highways where trucks wrongly use engine brakes. But now I've got a police plane flying over. And once I notice it in my house, because my house is less sound insulation than most houses because of this rigid styrofoam insulation of the passive solar design. And once I know that it's there, it pisses me off because I look at my flight radar app and I see that there's no plane on there. So that tells me it's the police plane. And I went out and looked at it, and it's just circling around. It has to take half the city to circle around. So it's like listening to a lawnmower for hours at a time in the middle of winter.
What are they looking for?
Well, that's just it, Brian. I don't know. And I bet that it's nothing important. We live in a small city. There's nothing major going on. I mean, I say use it if, it protects, if it puts police officers at risk. But if it's a break and enter and you're tracking some guy or hoping to track some guy, it's not worth the price to my health, to my mental health, to listen to this noise pollution.
It seems unlikely, and this is happening every day now?
Not every day, but it happened Thursday and Friday of last week, and it happened Saturday. It's new to them, so maybe they're training on it, I'm hoping, or they're just happy with their new plane. But another thing is, all that pollution's going up for no reason. I mean, an airplane in the sky is not a police officer on the ground.
No, and they could just switch to drones, too. I know some police departments have drones, so they just keep them in the trunk of the police car. And if they do come in a situation where it would help to have an overhead view, they just fly the drone.
Well, these are like the helicopters they have in major U.S. cities. They'll have infrared heat cameras that can really zoom in on them, on people. So I'm getting to the point where it's driving me crazy. I'm just going to take off my shirt and run down the street like I'm on Cops or something and say, hey, look at me. I can carry a big knife or something, you bastards.
Or leave them a message in the field outside of your house.
Yes, bugger off. The thing is, though, I'm sure they fly over half the city with to fly over one person or one area. So I'm not liking that, and I'm not appreciating the fact that it's polluting. And I don't think it should be used that much. Brian, I bought two Toyota Priuses, the two new cars I've ever bought in my life, and our lease was up a year ago on our one, and it's now $10,000 more than the car we paid for the same base starting model in Canada. And it's extreme, and that's not the case in the United States. It's not that extreme. It's a little bit more. And then it's a better performance car. It's a better looking car, but it's smaller. And really, it's not that different, and it still takes gasoline. So it's an old school technology, ultimately, 20-year-old technology, more than 20 years now. So yeah, it's 1/3 higher price. 1/3 higher price just to not have an ugly car. And it's ironic because I'm being forced into buying an electric car. I wouldn't have a choice. We couldn't get another Prius, not even a basic Prius. I can't even imagine what the plug-in Prius Prime will cost, where they're adding a lot. And I've got some information on that one because that one's out in Japan. It's got 80 kilometers estimated EPA range for electric only, which is pretty decent. It's pretty kind of what my Nissan Leaf would do, maybe, or something like that. My used Nissan Leaf, which has very low. But then you have the gas backup, which is nice. Will come in a lot in the winter, I'm guessing. They've got this $2,000 solar panel option for the roof, okay? Now that everybody thinks, great idea. Why don't they put solar panels on cars? Well, here's why. It's only going to pay you, somebody figured out on the internet that it's only going to pay you back about $30 a year. So 66 years to pay for itself, this option on your car. So save your money. Yeah, it's cool, but it's not there. We're not there to add a lot of kilometers or miles to a car's range with a solar panel on the roof, and I don't know that we ever will be. It's kind of not for that much money. If it was just there, that would be cool if you could add 6 kilometers a day, or if you left it out for a week and suddenly there was a bunch more kilometers on it, or that's one thing. But yeah. Oh, but this sucker can work as a gas generator for your home for up to 5 days, which is nice. It can do sort of a vehicle to load, not to home, but some sort of vehicle to load. So yeah, they haven't announced it even officially in Japan, but yeah, it's we'll see. It's just so I'm going electric and have no qualms about that whatsoever. Hey, we got a letter. It's always great when we have a letter.
Love letters?
We love letters, and, letters are fun. So this week we have a letter that says, "Good morning. I saw an article today about wind farms being a theory on why whales are washing up on the shores of New Jersey." I don't know if you saw that on the news, Brian, but they've had a bunch of whales. And, of course, the right-wing media in the United States says wind turbines. They haven't even erected them yet. They just did the survey work for them. I mean, it's not like, they don't do survey work for offshore oil all the time, constantly. Nobody goes blaming that for anything. So he says, ludicrous, embarrassing to be of the same country of people who believe it's wind farms, sonar exploratory planning work that is doing this, yet they are the same people who are pushing for an expanded offshore drilling and petroleum land leasing approvals by the U.S. government. As always, I love the show. I'm saving up episodes, actually, at the moment for a cross-country trip from West Virginia to Nevada that I'm taking next month. I'm looking forward to listening for hours straight. Cheers. Tierman Mendez in, I take it, Virginia. So thank you for that letter. And, I don't know if you're going to hate us by the end of the trip, if you're going to get sick of us. I don't recommend listening to more than 10 hours of Brian and I at any given sitting. It's like if you have an erection after 4 hours of Viagra, it's probably not a good thing. So I don't know. But, of course, it's all bull crap what he's talking about, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's no possible way that wind farms are responsible for dead whales.
Yeah,
but this is the kind of thing that comes out in the media sometimes, and this is the kind of negative story that we don't need to report on because the oil industry and the right-wing media are happy to do that job for us.
And, of course, the story comes out. People remember that. They remember the negative story. They don't remember the story that comes out a few days later. So this was a story that I read in one of the papers. Increase began of this whale deaths before the wind turbine surveys. All the way back in 2017, they were starting to see an increase. So since December, more than 23 whales have washed up dead along the east coast of the United States, leading wind energy skeptics to lay blame on the pending installation, not installation,
Not instant pending.
pending installation of offshore wind projects. Wow. Some scientists with the federal government say that there is no evidence to support those claims, so we do not have evidence that would support the connection between the wind survey work and these recent stranding events for anything like this in the last several years, said NOAA. Major environmental groups agree with NOAA's conclusion. Quote, there's no evidence that we've seen implicating wind turbines and the deaths of whales on the East Coast, Greenpeace Oceans Director John Hoskovar said. He told USA Today, so that's from USA Today, I think. Well, have a safe trip from Virginia. That's a lot of miles. That's 2,400 miles, Brian. That's a lot of miles. So watch out for trucks. Christ. That'll wake you up. Also, helicopters might be a problem. And helicopters that take shots at you, watch out for those. And, I've got an idea here. It's worth it. If I looked at the trip on the map, if you take the I-64, it's worth it to detour a bit north to see the world's biggest basket in Newark, Ohio, Brian.
Okay.
It's quite something. I put a picture of it in the script. When you do, please pause the podcast, okay? So I want you to pause the podcast right now when you get to the basket, and then we'll just do a little audio tour of the basket.
So this is a building. This is a building that looks like a basket.
Yes, it is. It's a building.
Like a picnic basket.
And I'll get to it. I'll get to it on the tour, okay? Welcome to the world's largest basket, located in Newark, Ohio. Roadside America writes, it is in this modest city that humankind has erected the grandest monument to the highest pinnacle of achievement by an advanced consumer culture, the hand-woven gift basket. This monument is in fact the world's largest basket. It was built as the 7-story corporate headquarters of the Longenberger Basket Company. The basket is a replica of Longenberger's medium market basket, only 160 times bigger. A good thing they didn't choose the XL Yogi the Bear basket to replicate, because that would have been much bigger. Many of the baskets company's employees were astounded when they moved into their new home office on December 17th, 1997. Yes, apparently the boss went crazy. The giant building and basket cost the company $32 million to construct. Much more expensive, than a normal building. The entire region around Newark remains basket happy. In nearby Dresden on Main Street and 5th, you'll find the old headquarters of the basket company still standing. A house-sized picnic basket that is 23 feet tall and 48 feet long. So, Brian, they started in their little basket house with their basket company, and they grew approximately 60 times.
Okay, so tours of roadside attractions is, I guess, a new segment on the show?
Yes, it is, Brian. It is.
Okay.
Thank you for visiting the world's largest basket, and now back to more of your binging of the Clean Energy Show. There you go. What's a service to our listeners? I try to help out whenever possible. We need to give back.
Well, I appreciate the sentiment, because I do the same thing. If I'm on a long road trip or something, I will save up episodes of a favorite podcast. So, thank you very much for doing that. We appreciate it.
And if you or anyone else visits that basket, let us know how it is. Or perhaps you already have visited it or are familiar with it. Drop us a line, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com.
Okay, so we're going to get on to Tesla Investor Day, which happened, I guess, a week ago today. It was a massive 3-hour-long presentation and started with a plan for how to change the entire economy of Earth away
Major
from
plan.
fossil fuels.
That's a big plan. It's bigger than a basket.
To sustainable energy. And overall, I thought it was great. I am a Tesla investor since 2019. So as an investor in the company, I thought it was fabulous. I wish more companies had a plan for transitioning away from fossil fuels, but of course this is core to what Tesla does. So yeah, they just spent 3 hours talking about all the different things that they're working on. And they're not the first ones to propose really, how we're going to switch to clean energy. We talked about Mark Jacobson's book recently called No Miracles Needed, which does the same thing, solar, wind, and batteries with maybe some hydro and nuclear. It's not that difficult to get off of fossil fuels. We just got to move faster, which was also one of the comments from the Tesla presentations.
For me, though, well, Brian, for me, I'm worried that this is what I wanted to hear, but I wasn't sure with the craziness and the headline making of Musk doing terrible things to to people and on Twitter, just being a horrible person. I wondered if he'd lost focus on what the mission was, but they have not. So that's a relief to me.
No, and they had such a large group of people presenting, like the heads of various departments and divisions. So it made me feel good about a sort of a post-Musk succession plan that clearly all of these people working as heads of these different departments are, this is a company now that has over 100,000 employees. So, Musk is still in charge, but, clearly he can't do everything. And so, I felt pretty confident about the people that they've got running these different departments.
They must have had about 15 of them on stage, and each of them had a chance to speak.
Yeah, did, a 3-hour presentation and then a bit of a Q&A at the end. So, so let's hit some of the highlights.
Well, the next generation model that they're going to build is going to be built in Mexico. So they announced or confirmed, I guess it was out already kind of, but they've confirmed a Mexico factory. How are you about that?
Yeah, no, it seems like a good idea. I think somebody said it's going to be the largest building in the entire world. So this is a massive factory that sort of looks like it's maybe double the size of the factory in Texas. So, they want to spread out their manufacturing in different areas. So it sounds like the idea is now that they'll have a cheaper car and to serve the kind of Central American and South American markets. So I think that's why they put it in Mexico.
Yeah. So they've got 4 cars on the market and plus the Cybertruck and the Tesla Semi. And what everyone's been waiting for is maybe a lower priced car, but then they also say that North America doesn't want that.
Yeah, but of course, in lots of markets, South America and China and India, cheaper car is essential, again, for just getting the world off of fossil fuels. So, big plans for, a very high volume car coming out of Mexico.
And one thing I noticed they mentioned was that the next motor that they're going to come up with, they're known for their motors, but the next one that they come up with is going to have eliminated rare earth materials, which seems almost like, how do you do that? Because there's magnets involved and everything. But 50% of the factory space will also be reduced for this motor manufacturing. So yeah, that all leads to lower cost vehicles, which leads to higher adoption, which leads to a better planet for you and I. So it's all important stuff here.
Yeah, no, the eliminating rare earth metals, they didn't really explain how that they're doing that, the details of that. But if they said it, I believe that they have somehow achieved that and improved the efficiency of the manufacturing at the same time. It's all very exciting stuff.
Well, they think about mining too, right? They're not just thinking about the manufacturing, and they're thinking about what they need for mining. They also, interestingly, said they didn't want to get into the business of mining because people had asked them that, the reporters afterwards. They said, we don't want to, but there is places where we need to, where we see a choke in the supply chain. And one of those places is lithium refining, which they're getting into a little bit.
Yeah, and because they have this roadmap for what the entire planet is going to need to shift to sustainable energy, they have a pretty good idea of what we're going to need in terms of lithium and nickel and all these other sort of minerals. So, they have announced some plans to do with lithium refining, but it's sort of a call to arms for other people to get into this business. Everyone's going to need lithium in the coming years. So if you want to start a lithium refining or mining business, it's probably a good idea, something you'd make a lot of money at. And again, getting back to their overall plan, like one of the negative things you often hear about the switch to clean energy is, oh, well, this is just going to increase all the horrible mining that goes on around the planet. But according to their calculations, once we eliminate the mining that's needed for the fossil fuel economy, the total amount of mining should be less than what we're doing right now. And that seems reasonable to me. And just the fact that because the fossil fuel economy is so inefficient, we talk about this a lot on the show, like it's super efficient to have, like solar panels on your roof and the energy, if that can go directly into the battery of your car, you've got incredible efficiency, like 80% efficiency with the energy that you're using. But with, combustion vehicles, you got to dig up the oil, you got to refine the oil, you got to transport it, and then you got to put it into the engine of your car, which in itself is not efficient. There's all kinds of waste heat generated from, so I thought that was a really great statistic that once we switch to the clean energy economy, we actually need less energy overall, like half the energy that we need now, because this new economy will just be way more efficient.
Are you listening out there, people? Because I get questions like this all the time.
Yeah.
Isn't what you're talking about going to create environmental disasters of mining and ripping up and destroying the earth for your batteries and for your energy storage? And the fact is the kind of the opposite. You're reducing the amount of mining that you need overall.
And it's, it's not perfect. And, we should probably all just grow our own vegetables in our front yard and just walk everywhere. But in terms of, keeping the planet running in a similar fashion, this is just a way more efficient way to do it.
Well, by the way, that vegetable garden I got for Christmas for my partner?
Yeah.
It's
an indoor thing?
It's an indoor thing where the light comes on, LED lights, grow lights, and it stays in water and you don't have to do anything with it. Well, we are at the tomato sprouting stage. We're starting to see tomatoes now in the middle of winter. And we already harvested some lettuce and are growing that back 2 more times before that'll be done. And it's
I feel like you might be too early on the tomatoes because we've got months of winter left.
Well, then I'll grow another batch. I'll set one of the other little pods in and grow some more. I think we only growing 1 or 2. The thing about tomatoes, though, growing indoors, is you have to fertilize them. So I told my partner to tell her boss she had to go home and do insemination. You have to take a little brush on the flowers and spread the pollen from flower to flower. They don't, unless you got bees in your house, which you may, Brian. I don't know, but I don't.
Sometimes.
Another interesting thing about the Tesla Investor Day is that they said that their next model, and I believe they said this for the Cybertruck too, correct me if I'm wrong, that they are going from 12-volt to 48-volt architecture. Now, everybody who's familiar with a car knows that we have got 12-volt batteries in there. Why do you have that? You have it to start the car, but it's also there to run all the electronics. Your radio, your fan for your heater, and your air conditioner, your lights, obviously. But there's a lot more in cars to use up that electricity now. There's sensors, there's self-driving control modules, there's powerful computers and powerful infotainment systems, all kinds of stuff that the way electricity works, if you change it to a higher voltage, you need smaller wires to deliver the same amount of electricity. So that's going to result in 75% less copper in the wiring of these cars, which is great. And that also means a lot less weight. It's many kilograms less of weight. And it's also simple, so it's cheaper overall to make that, they think. And they're encouraging the auto industry to do the same. They say it uses only a 16th of the energy, so you get more fuel economy for your battery size or a smaller battery or whatever. Like it's all good.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, they said everything from the Cybertruck forward is going to be this 48-volt architecture. And yeah, this was indicative of many things that they mentioned. It's they're going to achieve this cost reduction for the cheaper car that they've got coming out that will come out of Mexico. But it's not just one thing that's going to make it cheaper. It's not just, we're making the batteries cheaper. We're making the batteries cheaper. We're making the wiring cheaper. fewer parts. It takes many, many things for them to achieve this kind of, basically 50% reduction for what is their current cheapest car to make.
Another interesting thing that's come out of this is they've talked about sort of having and being an energy company, at least starting in Texas. They sell insurance to Tesla owners. Now they're selling energy to Tesla owners, which is great.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed by this. It's $30 US a month for overnight charging of your Tesla. I mean, it's unlimited at that rate over a month. Texas has a lot of wind. A lot of it blows overnight, so they've got excess power, and they've arranged deals with the utilities there to sell it as a base rate of $30 a month for Tesla charge. I don't know how they're going to figure that out. They might, Tesla has the information themselves. Maybe they pass that on to the, hopefully you don't have to install an expensive meter just for your Tesla.
No, well, I think it'll be just with the existing thing. Like, it'll have to be a Tesla car and it'll have to be a Tesla home charger, because both of those things can talk to the internet and presumably talk to the grid. So I think that they can make this happen with just the existing infrastructure. So yeah, they're going to become a power utility, but basically a virtual power utility that can apparently just talk individually to certain customers and, deliver unlimited overnight charging for $30. We've talked about before, there are some places that already have super cheap overnight charging. It just depends on what kind of power is available on your grid. And so Tesla's taken the step. That seems amazing to me.
I'm hoping we get demand charging where we live so that we can save money charging our EVs overnight on the timers that come built into the cars.
Yeah. We're still waiting for that here.
Now, $30,
some places already
$30 a month might be what a lot of people will pay already, right? If you've got a fairly low price for electricity where you are, and it varies from region to region, state to state, country to country, province to province, but if you've got a fairly low rate and you don't do a heck of a lot of driving, in fact, if you probably do an average amount of driving and you're in a not too cold of a climate, say the southern half of the continental United States, you're probably going to spend around $30 a month. But if you're an Uber driver or somebody like that, I wonder if they can participate, because that would really increase their income, Brian, if they could get away with doing that for $30 a month.
I mean, they have to charge overnight, so they'd be sort of limited to that one cheap charge per day. But if you can drive your Uber all day, basically $1 a day for your fuel.
And some people can do, I remember looking at the stats, if you have a long-range Tesla and you're in a warm climate where you're not using the heater, you can do that and make it a whole day. And okay, maybe occasionally you have to do a bit of a bump up with the supercharger in places, but I still think that would make your income a lot more palatable.
And speaking of which, some of the very first version 4 Tesla Superchargers have now been, they're just setting them up in Europe. The first ones are being installed in Europe. So the Cybertruck they've also mentioned is going to have a 1,000-volt architecture for the charging. So this is the next version of this
1,000
supercharging.
Why 1,000? Like, that's really high.
Is that what it was? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's mostly for the Semi. Like, the Semi is going to need the fastest charging, so I assume this is a standard that's kind of going to work for everything. But yeah, the 48-volt architecture for the internal stuff, 1,000-volt architecture for charging, new chargers coming online, and I think we're going to talk about the Magic Dock as well later on of charging non-Tesla cars as well.
Yeah, so they did picture a wireless charging thing in one of their display pictures, so that was interesting. I've learned, Brian, that it used to be a problem with efficiency. You'd lose a lot of your efficiency going wireless, but apparently it's almost negligible now. They've improved it so much.
Yeah, so there was a teaser image in one of the slides that they showed at the Tesla presentation, which showed a wireless charger where you drive on top of a pad. And yeah, people have talked about this kind of thing before, but it tends to be kind of inefficient. So I think that's the main reason it hasn't gone mainstream. So yeah, perhaps Tesla has figured that out and we'll get wireless charging.
And you have to add, weight and stuff to your car to receive that charge, sort of a big magnet to receive it under your car. I don't think it's, I don't know if people are going to be clamoring for that unless you're just infinitely rich and you just, who cares? spend an extra few grand on that. But it's not that hard to plug in your car is what I'm saying.
No.
It's pretty easy.
Yeah, plug in your, yeah.
Especially
we do it every night.
If you're a Tesla, you push the button on the Schmengi. And did you get you didn't get that done yet, your charger installed?
No, it's not installed yet, but yeah, I bought a Tesla home charger just so that I have the button on the handle, which makes it even easier.
So you basically grab the handle and your little flap opens on your car, you stick it in, you go have your spaghetti and meatballs. I don't know.
Yeah, and then when you want to stop charging, same thing, you press the button and just pull it. It's the easiest thing possible.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to move on now to nuclear power, a fun topic that we discuss regularly on the show. So there is a new nuclear power plant that has come online in the U.S. in the state of Georgia. The Vogtle 3 nuclear power plant has finally spun up. And, you know, this is largely good news. I was making a joke about it off the top of the show. It is, of course, late, and it is, of course, over budget, as all of these nuclear projects seem to be. So about 7 years late and double the initial budget, which I feel like we've seen worse figures than that.
Yeah, we have. And I thought this one was worse than that, actually. But yeah, it's basically the only new nuclear that's coming online in the States anytime soon. And it was supposed to come online a long time ago and be a lot cheaper. So every time there's it's largely because they didn't know how to do it anymore. Nuclear has gone out of favor. And since even all the way back to Chernobyl, and there hasn't been a lot, initiated after that.
Now, if we want to be optimists here on the show, which we love to be, then maybe they will now have learned, because this is the first.
Well, that's what they're saying.
Plant.
I don't buy it, though. It's one power plant for a whole generation of power that has to be built in the next 12 years, Brian. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, and they're not setting out to do that, because the power grid has to be decarbonized 100% by 2035 to meet our targets.
It also, I'll mention, it is a Generation 3 Plus pressurized water reactor, a PWR, which is the first of its kind in the U.S. So this is some slightly different design that's never been done before in the
there's
US.
a few new kinds of designs. I think some of them even use salt water or some sort of sodium solution. But the same people who say that we're going to learn from this also say, well, we have to start schools where all these people need to go to school to learn how to build that. Well, I don't see any schools being built for nuclear, so I'm not convinced. And plus, of course, the price issue with nuclear not being competitive. But even so, I mean, part of the Tesla presentation there was how quickly they are going up the S-curve on grids storage for their batteries. Like, it's just taking off. And so that means, cost reductions and, their initial deployment is not just storing energy, it's saving the grid from problems and saving the grid money. So,
yeah, and going quickly is a big part of this. And again, that was another nice thing about the Tesla presentation. They're talking frequently about going as fast as they possibly can. And this is what's going to help us transition, which we got to transition as fast as we can. And so the addendum to this story about the new nuclear, this is from Electrek. The previous story was from Power Magazine. But Electrek reporting wind, solar, and batteries will make up 82% of the 2023 utility scale U.S. energy being deployed this year. So 82% of the energy being deployed on the grid this year in the U.S. will be wind, solar, and batteries. 82%.
And that is the 18% is including that damn nuclear reactor.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a big deal. And so many people, I think even people who listen to our show don't understand this. They don't get it. They don't get what's going on. There's a lot going on with solar and battery storage and wind, and the economics are taking over. In fact, even the International Energy Agency is saying the same thing, in that it's going to be a large part of the grid fairly soon.
Yeah. And, solar, as we know, is dirt cheap and getting cheaper. Adding batteries, it's maybe not the cheapest thing once you add batteries, but of course the cost of batteries is coming down as well.
Yeah. And the supply and demand is more demand than supply right now for batteries, but expect those to come down. Plus, you keep seeing tweaks. There's all these different tweaking of batteries that are coming out now. Some of them are even being commercialized, and they have their own take on things, and they are improving things and coming up with different applications. A lot of them would work well for grid storage.
No, and for solar panels, of course, like bifacial solar panels is now, kind of the norm.
We heard about that, and you think, okay, well, how long till they commercialize that before it's free? Next thing you know, I find out that they're installed next door in the field of farm next door. Like, it's suddenly standard. I mean, there was no press conference. It just happened. And even here, where we live, things like that are now standard to have bifacial solar panels, which increase the efficiency.
Improvements happening rapidly.
So Tesla opened their supercharger network to a small, I think, 10 different sites in the United States. Most of them were in the Northeast. One or two were in California. And the second that happened, 2 hours after the second that happened, YouTube videos started to appear. It was kind of like a very interesting experience to see them on YouTube.
It was great. The one I saw was Marques Brownlee, MKBHD, and he had his Rivian, and he went to a Tesla charger to charge his Rivian. And then another YouTuber pulled up in a Ford F-150 Lightning.
It was struggling.
He's got like 20 million subscribers, so he was able to give a nice plug to the other guys.
But the funny thing is, I saw the other guy's video first, and then I saw Marquis's video. And then I saw the podcast he was on. He was actually from, is he from Clean Technica, I think? That guy who does
but
he's one of the writers or main guys from one of the major websites. Anyway,
basically the first day was all YouTubers.
And he called him Marques by accident. He was talking about how, I called him Marques the whole time on his podcast. So. It's funny, they all showed up and they were all testing, and people drove various distances to get there. But I mean, if you're a YouTuber and you're making content, I mean, that's what you got to do, right? You got to go be the first to get the views, and it's worth your while. I mean, even Marques did a lot.
Yeah, so in Europe, this is an easier problem because in Europe, they standardized on the CCS charger. So Tesla cars and all non-Tesla cars in Europe have the CCS connector. So opening up the network to non-Teslas, not a big deal. But in North America, Tesla cars use the Tesla connector. Other cars use CCS. So they had to come up with this clever magic dock. And as the YouTubers showed, it seems to work.
I was impressed with how elegant it was, the whole experience, because I was wondering for a long time, how this is going to be awkward.
Yeah. I thought they'd have adapters like hanging on a chain.
Or maybe a separate cable altogether, which would add expense and it wouldn't be too slick. But they've got the same place where the Tesla cable plugs into, it just plugs into something a bit more bulky and black. And what it does is it locks into a adapter that might cost $200, $300, $400, $500, who knows? Often they do cost that much money, that adapts it to the CCS standard. Now, the Tesla standard is better, but this is the world we live in, so they have to come up with this big, giant end that locks on when you... Here's what you do, Brian. I'm just going to go through it. So I was really impressed with how well the Tesla Magic Dock adapter works, because it seems to be flawless. You download the Tesla app if you don't have one, if you're not a non-Tesla driver. And that app, you just set up an account with your credit card as you would with any other app. And you pick a location where you are. It'll look at your GPS and find out where you are. And then you just pick the stall number, like might be 8A or 8B or something like that. And you just say, would you like to click here to unlock the dock. That's hard to say. Plug it in and you start charging. So you just click, you hear a little click and you push it up, pull it out and plug it into your car. And after 10 seconds of the car talking to the charger, and they say it actually works faster than some, Electrify America type chargers too.
I would think so. And yeah, you sort of have to push the connector up till you hear the click, then you pull it out and it's got the adapter attached, and the adapter is locked onto there because there's a locking mechanism already in the Tesla chargers, because when you plug it into your car, it locks in so that it can't be yanked out and you get electrocuted. So yeah, super elegant, and then you just when you're done, you put it back in the same spot. And then if the next person comes along and they have a Tesla, they just pull it out normally. They don't have to pull out.
And the adapter stays there, and
with it.
they're none the wiser.
Yeah, it seems to
Now,
work.
there are a few little issues. I was disappointed with the Seth from Electric, friend of the show, who was one of the first people on the scene with his Chevy Bolt. I was curious to see that. And he just pulled it out like a Neanderthal. He didn't push it in, so he just yanked it out. I wanted to shout at the screen. There is a bit of an issue, though, because the Tesla charging ports of cars are in a bit different area than everybody else, so you have to sometimes take up 2 stalls. You're occupying a stall that would normally be occupied by Tesla, and so 2 chargers are taken up. The cords are often not long enough. One guy that Marquis helped had the 1-inch clearance, like he had to get within, a hair's width of that charger to get his cable in. But the V4 chargers that are coming online in Europe reportedly have longer cables, so that will solve that problem, because all you need is a bit more there. Maybe another foot or 2 would do the trick. Cars don't charge to the full potential all the time due to technical differences in the cars, mostly the voltage. So the Bolt was able to take full advantage if it was empty and warm enough, because that's only 50 kilowatts, remember. But the Hyundai Ioniq 5, those cars from Korea have 800-volt architecture, which charge very quickly, over 250 or so, right? Kilowatts.
Yeah. So there's some sort of translation issue between the slightly different voltage. So yeah, some cars can't take full benefit of the full juice.
But you have the option of this network as a backup, which in itself is great, because everybody's having problems with the charging networks in the States, except for Teslas. So it's a backup.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like if it goes poorly, you'll still get 50 kilowatts, which is, not the worst.
Not the worst. And not great, but it doesn't leave you stranded, that's for sure. You're not buying a hotel room because, 16 of the 18 chargers are broken somewhere. It does cost more. I think they put a 20% premium on what Tesla owners pay, and Tesla owners are already charged a fair bit for charging now on the highway. It started pretty easy, but now it's gotten bigger. Hey, is there any incentive for you to give like your Tesla code out over the podcast for people to get? Is that back? Is that returned? Is there some sort of?
No, there's no incentives yet. I think if you're putting solar on your house, you can get a sort of a little.
I believe that'll come back once demand is an issue again. Once they start lowering prices and have competition and are able to catch up to the demand. With their supply, that maybe they'll want to do something like that, and we'll get you some free supercharging. I don't know where.
Yeah, so Tesla cars have standardized on having the charge port in the the rear left.
What do you think about
car,
that? I've never asked you what you thought about that. I'm kind of curious.
It's always slightly awkward because you have to back into the charger. And so sometimes I have not parked close enough, because even for the Teslas, the cable is kind of short. So you kind of have to park pretty precisely. But I think that, there's some people like, the Ford F-150 Lightning really struggled with the cable not being long enough. So I think depending on what kind of car you have, like F-150 Lightning drivers will probably learn to use the Electrify America network wherever possible, because, parking in, or you have to end up taking up 2 spots because you've parked, maybe your charger is on the right side and then you're using the wrong charger, et cetera, et cetera. So, definitely not a perfect experience for non-Tesla users, and also, maybe not getting full power.
Well, hopefully they can improve some of that things fairly easily.
Yeah. It's a start, and some of them have like drive forward charging stalls. So those should work well for people that have their port in a weird place. So it's just a start, and it's a promising start.
They seem to have done it on low use stations where they're not going to. They can learn from it, and but I'm impressed. I'm impressed with how elegant and easy it is. It's not that big of a deal. Now with a Tesla, all you have to do is have an account and plug in, and you're done.
Yeah,
because it knows who you are, because it'll recognize the VIN of the car, gets transmitted, and it'll charge your account, and that's that. That's fantastic, but this is the next best
Tesla
thing.
experience is the best, but this sounds like this app experience is a close second, and probably better than most of the other chargers out there. Okay, so we have a story from Carbon Brief. UK emissions fall 3.4% in 2022 as coal use drops to its lowest level since 1757.
I can't remember
Now-
1757, Brian, and I'm fairly old.
Yeah. I was kind of disappointed. You know, you'd think that with all of the modern technologies, we maybe would have gotten to this milestone a little sooner than this. But this is, basically they used the same amount of coal in 1757 as they're using now, and we're just finally starting to drop a bit lower on that. But yeah, this is in the UK. The air is cleaning up. And the other thing that we're starting to read in some of these kind of stories is that, yeah, emissions are going down and air is already starting to get cleaner. And it's not necessarily tied to the economy. We're starting to break away from that fossil fuel economy. So even though emissions are going down, the economy is still growing over this period. And that's one of the exciting things. And, I've seen other stories like that. Of course, everyone has been worried, like if you're a government, you don't want to ruin the economy of your country. But now that we're starting to become detached from this fossil fuel economy, the economy still can grow as emissions are dropping, which was not the case, 10, 20 years ago.
266 years that's a chunk of time, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yeah. And it makes me think of, I've mentioned before there's a Netflix series called The Crown, which is about the monarchy in England. And there's a great episode in the first season. It's the fourth episode, season 1. And it's about the Great Smog of London, which was in 1952.
One of my favorite episodes, and also
is a great episode. It's a real sort of history lesson. And 10 to 12,000 people died in 1952 as this smog set in on London from burning coal. And it was just the particular weather patterns were just really, there was an inversion going
cool
on.
Air
and so
under
it was
warm and stagnant, and it was nasty.
Yeah. And eventually the weather changed and it just all blew away, but not before 10 to 12,000 people died. And, here we are in 2023, finally starting to go down on our coal use in the UK. You'd think with that history that they may have gotten rid of their coal sooner than that. But, it is what it is.
As a monarchist expert, was it true that Winston Churchill's young assistant, was hit and killed? Is that true?
With the smog? Yeah, I believe that is true. Yeah, the show does sometimes take liberties with the truth, but I think the fact basis for that show was fairly accurate.
That was so bad that you couldn't cross a street safely. Like, that's just nuts.
Yeah.
And... like before, they didn't believe the scientists.
Yeah.
It's an age-old problem.
And then suddenly people are dropping dead and, they decide to do something about it. And then just quickly, in addendum to that, a story from The Economist this week. War and subsidies have turbocharged the green transition. So according to The Economist, they think that about 10 years has now been knocked off the timeline for the switch to clean energy with the recent wars in Europe, which have...
Brian, that's freaking amazing. Like, that's just...
Yeah.
I'm gobsmacked to hear that, even though I suspected and we heard inclinations of that being true. But 10 years? Yeah, that's crazy.
10 years knocked off the transition timeline because of wars and the new subsidies that have recently come online, which is very encouraging.
Yeah, that's Joe Biden. And, my son asked me the other day via text, we get into political discussions. He said, who's your favorite president of the United States in history? And I had to think, and I was, Obama was, as a lefty, Obama was popular, but he didn't do the things he said he was going to do. And I thought about it, and I said, you know what? Joe frickin' Biden. I think he is by far my favorite U.S. president on what he has done. He's actually done it. And he continues to do it. I mean, he's got this thing where he's forcing, if you want the subsidies for something, you have to have childcare at your company. That's unheard of for the United States. That's European socialism. And not the bad kind, kids. I think it's good to have childcare and so that women can enter the workforce. It's just, I really think I don't know. I'm losing people here. I'm losing people. I know.
The clean energy bill is a big deal.
It is a big deal. And if you don't know it, look into it. It's bigger than you can. We try to explain it here on the show, but it's quite amazing. And I think even the people, climate scientists and climate advocates, they're continually amazed by it. Like 6-8 months later, they're still saying, wow, did you know this was in there? I mean, that's incredible, and this and that. And yeah, it's a big, big freaking deal. And so is the war. Thank you, Mr. Putin. Yeah, I watched the documentary Navalny, also up for Best Oscar. Not environmentally related, but at the end.
No, I haven't seen it yet.
At the end, he exposes Putin's mansion, one of several. That's quite decadent.
So I think that probably leads us nicely into the next story.
Okay. Here. This is what James was watching on YouTube, okay? This is other things that I've watched. This week, it's Undecided with Mark Farrell. Okay, he's just one of these YouTubers who has does his research, does it well. And I watch it. A lot of people watch it. He makes a living doing this. He's living off the grid, Brian. He's got building a whole new factory-built home that will rely on solar and a heat pump with geothermal, not air source, but geothermal. And he's in the U.S. Northeast as well.
Yeah, like a prefab home built mostly in a factory, then you set it up and assemble it at your place.
Yeah, and that just is a more efficient and more precise way of doing it. And also it works well because your construction time is shorter in bad weather, because that can really add to delays and cost overruns and such. So heat pump innovations seem to be getting better. In fact, the usability seems to be getting down to around -29 and colder and -20 Fahrenheit. And a bit lower. So Trane, Lennox, and Carrier. I have a Trane furnace, by the way, which I recommend to anyone because mine has not broken after 13, 14 years. And one or two others have already met this challenge that Biden administration had to improve heat pump performance for cold weather. And they wanted it to go far beyond -15 Celsius and 5 degrees Fahrenheit, which was common for heat pumps. And by God, after a couple of years, they did it. And, you know, there's 2 or 3 companies have already said that they've done it and they're going to bring this technology to market. And Lennox is one of them, and I think Carrier is another one. Trane has not said when they're coming to market with it, but they've said that they've got it. So they've accomplished this in 2 years. I mean, we're just starting. The thing is, Brian, we're just starting this. And they've already said, hey, can you make them better? And they did. Just like, so I think as heat pumps take over the world, the innovation's not done yet.
No, and I'll mention again the Tesla presentation. So they had a plan to get the world off of fossil fuels. And for their math that they did, 22% of the problem can be solved with heat pumps. So every furnace on Earth that runs on natural gas is going to have to be eliminated and replaced with a heat pump. And once we do that, that takes care of 22% of worldwide emissions.
Again, that YouTube channel, I was going to play a clip, but I'm going to skip that. It's Undecided with Matt Farrell. He also had a clip during that video where people at a cottage were putting a loop in their lake. And I thought of you. You know, it was a flexible loop. It wasn't like drilled into the ground. They were just sort of, and they said 600% performance or something from using water.
Okay, so it's like geothermal, but instead of digging into the ground,
it's like what they do in Toronto for the cooling, except you're taking the heat out of it and the cool out of it, or you're putting the heat back into it in the summer.
Well, I wonder, my lake is not that deep, so I have a feeling maybe it won't work as well.
Okay.
But I'm not an
No,
engineer,
Brian, you're not. You're not an engineer. I wonder if it even needs to be deep, because even if it's a block of ice, would it? I don't know. I'm not an engineer.
Yeah, I guess if you're heating your home, it might be better if it's shallow, like it'll stay warmer. You want it to stay warmer.
But you probably don't want it to be a block of ice either. You want it to be warm enough not to freeze, so that it's...
In Toronto, they use it for cooling, but this you're talking about using it
heating
for
and cooling. So, yeah, improving the efficiency of both. So, yeah, you're right, though. It's like using the ground, but perhaps better. Although, would they let you do that at the lake because it's a provincial park and yada, yada, yada? I don't know.
Yeah.
Environmental study.
Probably.
Millions of dollars. But I thought I would mention that anyway.
Okay, so a story here from Electrek. I just wanted to mention this quickly because we mentioned recently, a week or two ago, that the EU had voted to ban combustion vehicles by 2035. And we mentioned at the time it wasn't the final vote because there's several stages on this. But apparently Germany is having second thoughts now. So this has not, in fact, passed. When we mentioned the story a couple weeks ago, it was basically just going to be a formality, the final vote to approve it. But now Germany is stepping in and they're saying, well, maybe we should have some biofuels in there. So Germany's having second thoughts. So just wanted to mention it because
Germany,
we talked about it.
Italy and Germany are having second thoughts, and it's never good when they're fighting the world. That's never a good thing.
But yeah, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago like it was a done deal. So I thought I better update that, and we will keep an eye on that.
All right. Well, we're running late. It's time for the lightning round, where we wrap up the week's news in environmental news, climate news, and electrification of the power grid and clean energy and all that. Any fast-paced look. That's how we end the show every week. Hundreds, if not thousands, of weather stations in Asia today, as we record this, are at record high temperature levels, in some cases up to 5 degrees Celsius above the previous high temperatures for early March. In China, 102 stations are above the early March records. And it's 21 degrees in North Korea. 24 in South Korea, so it's winter, right?
Celsius, which is around 70 Fahrenheit area. Toronto was plus 15 a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, which set a record for that time in March. And then I went there and visited, and they had a blizzard and it was freezing.
I was hoping you'd rent a Tesla or rent an e-bike or do something that we could use on the show, but no. You're just there to go to your cocaine parties and whatever it is you do, you bohemian.
I went to the Leonard Cohen show at the AGO, the Art Gallery of Ontario, and it was all of Leonard's notes, and you could see his notebooks for writing his songs. I'm a big Leonard Cohen fan, so that was a lot of fun.
Well, you never mentioned that before. Now we know, I guess. Okay, the U.S. Postal Service is planning to buy over 9,000 electric vehicles and 14,000 charging stations this year. Now, we've talked about this lots of times before, but I'm wondering, what's up with that? Why are they buying more charging stations, than almost twice as many charging stations than vehicles? Are they putting one at your front step? I mean, that doesn't make quite... I don't understand that. Maybe they're preparing for next year or something. I don't know.
Yeah, they keep sort of switching these numbers around in terms of their procurement for electric vehicles, but by and large, they've been making better progress in that.
Yeah, a lot of people have criticized them for not being more ambitious because it's a perfect use case scenario for that. Carbon brief analysis, UK emissions fall 3.4% in 2022. We talked about that. The Daily Beast, Elon Musk now has bodyguards flank him everywhere inside Twitter HQ. Occasionally I like to throw in a crazy Elon Musk story. They accompanied him to the bathroom because he thinks there's going to be a coup. This is never... See, that's why I worry, Brian, is stuff like that. Like the dictator sort of crazy cuckoo, I've gotten too rich and too powerful and too famous.
But then the presentation was totally above board and totally sensible, so,
A Florida lawmaker wants to ban EVs from evacuating during hurricanes. Now, I would normally put a Florida joke in here, but we find out we have listeners in Florida, so, I'm not going to make Florida jokes anymore. I can't. Unless the situation really calls for it. But he says the cars might stall, which is stupid because when you evacuate for a hurricane, the power's not out. You're evacuating before the damn hurricane gets there.
Right.
And, electric cars, when they are stuck in traffic, they don't use any gas. They use a small amount for heating or cooling, which you can adjust or open the windows and use a lot less of it. So there's really not a great argument there. And then when the power does come back on, because gas stations need power too, right? Well, they're often, it comes back on and they have no gas in the storage tanks because they've used it all for the evacuation. And so the electric car is your guide to get around now because they'll have power. Power equals, gas.
And as long as there's a working outlet somewhere, you can charge your electric car, but you can't gas up your gas car just anywhere.
Okay. Power was the biggest U.S. emitting sector for decades, and then it was transportation for a while. But now, and this is quite surprising to the people who follow this, the industrial sector emits more than power. Why? Because power has quickly become cleaner. Rooftop solar in Australia is set to eclipse coal as installations reach more than 20 gigawatts. So there's more than 20 nuclear reactors worth of power, peak power, on people's homes and businesses in Australia. Now, it's a great place for it. It's close to the equator.
That's just the rooftop.
Yeah, that's
solar.
not solar
not even the grid
farms.
solar.
That's rooftops, which is piecemeal.
Which is it's a huge thing in Australia. Lots of people have solar on their roofs.
Yes, it's like 25% of the homes have solar on their roofs, which, they have to do the power utility has to do a study here on where you live before they approve you for it. And the reason is, I realized this the other day, is the power that I make extra and you make extra goes to our neighbors. And that's our battery instead of having a battery or something like that. We sell it back to the grid.
Yeah.
But at some point, all of our neighbors, if they have solar too, it's got nowhere to go. It can't go back up the grid. The grid gets down, the voltage gets stepped down to go into our block or our area of town, and then it can't go back. So I think that there is restrictions on how that works, and I think Australia must be meeting their maximum capacity in some regards, in some cases there, unless there's something that I don't know about. But I do know that solar or power can't easily go two ways, at least from solar. So a new study about seabirds and offshore wind turbines says none of the 4 species that they studied for 2 years died, 0. Now, this was done by a wind-related company, but apparently it's been vetted, and most people are regarding it as a legitimate study, but they're also wondering what about the other species of birds, if there are more that are involved. But they studied 4 and found 0 over 2 years.
No, wind turbines have nothing to do with killing whales, but they do occasionally kill birds. I know we talked about birds of prey sometimes get hit by the wind turbines because they're always looking down. The birds of prey are kind of looking down for prey.
Oh, that's
and they literally
why.
don't see the blade in front of them. So they do kill some birds.
Yeah. I've been watching an
shorebirds,
eagle's nest on YouTube. And then my family, and then we got into this thing where they strap a GoPro to a cat. Quite fascinating what a cat gets up to, Brian. Quite fascinating.
Yeah.
But we've been watching this eagle's nest, and they've given up at Friends of Big Bear Valley in California in the mountains, and they've given up on their eggs. The eggs did not. So now they're no longer on the nest, and we're just looking at these eggs waiting for the vultures to come. Anyway, But it's quite fascinating to see. It's a lot of work to have babies in the wild. That's all I know. So I don't want to believe in reincarnation because I think being a human's hard, but it gets worse. All right. Well, Ford files a patent for a system that could remotely possess your car. Repossess your car. So you don't pay it, it drives away by itself.
Possession would be like an exorcist situation.
Well, that's bad too. They'll repossess if it's possessed. It's got a possession indicator on it. Another study has confirmed that Japan, an importer of all fossil fuels used in the power sector, can go 90% clean energy by 2035 while cutting electricity costs by 6% and emissions by 92%. That is our time for this week. Brian, I've got to get going. My battery is dying on my laptop, but we'll see you again next week. cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And remember, thanks to our donors who've clicked on the link in the show notes and everyone else who supports the show in your own way. We'll see you again next time.
See you next week.